I'm Amanda Beal, and I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And I'm pleased to be here today along with my co-chair of the working group, Tom Abello, who will be presenting the strategies in just a little bit. First of all, I'd like to recognize the 24 members of the Natural and Working Lands Working Group, each of whom were asked to devote about 40 hours to all of our meetings, not to mention many additional hours of preparation for each meeting, which included reviewing more than 1,000 pages of briefing documents and countless drafts of strategy documents. Some of these working group members were also tapped for their expertise and asked to create formal presentations to the working group. And as you can see, members of our group represent diverse interests, from large forest landowners to small woodlot owners, loggers, environmental groups, farmers, natural resource agencies, scientific researchers, and more. So in addition to thanking them for their incredible work, I'd also like to acknowledge that we were very fortunate to work with a skilled facilitator over the past several months, Jody Sapphire. And I also want to express our appreciation for the work of Tom Gordon from the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, who served as primary staff support for the working group. Both of their contributions were critically important to us achieving our goals. So first, I will start out by saying that given the amount of time that we had and the size of our working group and the breadth of our scope, we didn't attempt to prioritize the strategies that we're presenting here today. And we also did not attempt to assign metrics or measures, as we see that work as part of the next steps on the road to implementation. What we did do is focus on making sure we fleshed out what felt like the right strategies and that they were supported by everyone in the group. We also wanted to make it clear up front that we did not expect everyone to agree all of the time, and that was okay, and that any disagreements would be noted in the final report out to the Climate Council if they couldn't be resolved. Members in our group were highly engaged as we worked through many complex issues. And we are pleased that in the end, we arrived at consensus on all 5 of our strategies and all but only one of our sub-strategies. And that one exception is noted in our report to the Climate Council. On a functional level, we arrived at our strategies through the following process. We held monthly work group meetings as well as numerous subgroup meetings. And because of the scope of our subject area, we began by really aiming to bring the whole group to a base level of understanding about both the opportunities for natural and working lands to play a role in mitigating carbon, as well as to understand the climate change impacts on these lands and the industries that they support. We also wanted to ensure that we were all starting from a place of recognizing that our natural and working lands can provide climate solutions while playing an important role in our economy and in creating products and/or services that are important to our everyday lives. So to that end, we had a series of expert presentations followed by robust discussions that were organized around 3 topic areas: natural lands, forestry, and agriculture. And once we achieved that baseline understanding, we broke into 3 corresponding subgroups that met multiple times in between working group meetings to tackle coming up with a proposed set of strategies. And then the whole group analyzed and discussed all of the proposed strategies. And this led to an opportunity to do some grouping into more cross-cutting strategy areas that in most cases would address both natural and working lands. Once we did that, we had another round of subgroup meetings organized by these new overarching strategy areas, the results of which are what we are presenting today. In terms of public engagement, along the way, we had very active and ongoing involvement from the public, and a number of people regularly attended our in-person and Zoom meetings and provided really valuable feedback and background information throughout our process. And last month, we also held an open public comment period, and as a result, we received 93 responses, which definitely helped to shape our final recommendations. And here I'll note that one of the recurring topics that public members commented on was that we hadn't done enough to address aquatic resources and how they fit into the landscape. So just prior to our final meeting earlier this month, an additional subgroup met to address this omission and prepare a proposal for the whole working group to consider at our last meeting. And that at that meeting on June 6th, we discussed public comments and this additional proposed language related to aquatic resources, and determined as a group what to incorporate into our strategy document. So that's how we got to where we are now. But before jumping right into our strategies, I just want to take a few more minutes to add a bit more context to the importance of our natural and working lands. So the point of this the first top right-hand square here, is essentially to note that these lands are the base for very important sectors of our economy. Our agriculture, forestry, and outdoor recreation sectors combined contributes more than $20 billion to our state's economy annually and supports approximately 140,000 jobs. Investing in the strategies we have identified could serve to grow the overall economic contribution of these sectors further. And in the second box there, we just want to recognize that in addition to the economic benefit, our natural and working lands provide numerous other benefits, including ecosystem services, such as those listed on this slide and many more. And overall, yes, the strategies that we've developed will cost something to implement, but we believe that doing so will be good for our economy and will help us to build economic, ecological, and community resilience. So it's important to recognize that our natural and working lands already sequester a significant amount of carbon, equivalent to approximately 75% of Maine's current greenhouse gas emissions. And as the most forested state in the nation, our vast forest resources of more than 17 million acres already offer tremendous carbon benefits to Maine and the nation. But we also have an opportunity to further maximize the positive potential of our forest and agricultural products and to further reduce our overall emissions footprint. For example, we can encourage building structures with wood-based materials to sequester carbon, strengthen the forest products demand, and keep the forest economy strong. We can also utilize forest products in a way that replaces the use of those made with other materials that have a higher emissions profile. We can also ensure that more of the food we consume is grown in a way that maximizes soil health and the opportunity to sequester carbon. As it stands now, approximately 90% of the food we consume comes from outside of Maine. Committing to growing more of our food in our state while maximizing soil and climate-friendly practices can provide us with an opportunity to more directly address climate impacts of food production. Finally, I want to speak to the issue of threats to our land by climate change and sprawl. We know that climate change is having multiple adverse effects on our natural environment. These include impacts to our forests that will result in a shift in species mix and density. These changes may ultimately reduce the capacity of the land to sequester carbon, provide connected wildlife habitat, and also threatens to weaken the economy of our working lands. The potential for wildfire seems to be increasing, and our forests and farmlands are increasingly threatened by invasive pests that can gain a foothold as climate conditions change. And we know that extreme weather events can cause costly and destructive erosion issues and water quality issues as well. And finally, it's important to understand that these two threats to our lands, climate change and sprawl, are intrinsically linked, in that the loss of land to development diminishes our greatest tool for sequestering carbon. Suburban sprawl, particularly in southern and coastal Maine, is consuming approximately 10,000 acres of working lands or open space each year. But sprawl is a phenomenon that is also taking place in rural areas of the state as well. The bottom line is that we cannot lose forest or farmland and still maintain the significant carbon benefits that these lands provide. So with that, I will now turn it over to Tom, who's going to walk us through our strategies.
Thank you, Commissioner. Hello, everyone. You have our recommended strategies and sub-strategies in your briefing materials, and we'll dig into each one, but just as a quick overview, the five are: number one, conservation of working lands and natural areas; number two, financial assistance for carbon-friendly practices for foresters, farmers, and landowners; number three, technical assistance to landowners and managers for carbon-friendly practices for forestry, agriculture, and wildlife habitat. Number 4, update state programs to ensure that our planning, policies, and promotion address climate. And number 5, support for ongoing research on climate solutions. Taking these steps will have almost immediate benefits for our economy and our climate. So let's dig into those. Strategy 1. Throughout our working group process, we heard a common theme: maintain what you have. As the commissioner noted, Maine is the most forested state in the nation at about 90%. Over the last 20 years, Maine has increased its conserved lands from 6% to about 20%. This has been achieved primarily through conservation easements. We can do more on this front, and we should, to maintain our forest and agriculture base. Because as we've learned through this process, our working lands sequester 75% of our annual greenhouse gas emissions. This strategy proposes a dedicated, sustained funding source to provide permanent conservation for forest lands, farmlands, and areas of exceptional biodiversity value. We see this primarily through easements and fee acquisition, and it's important to note at the state level, the Land for Maine's Future program, which has been the consistent funding source for these types of activities, has not been funded in nearly a decade. Finally, a piece of this is ensuring that our conservation programs also incorporate climate mitigation and resiliency goals into their grant criteria and project selection. Strategy 2. Most of our working and natural lands are privately owned, about 93%, and we rely upon these landowners to be good stewards for public and personal benefit. Financial incentives help landowners implement more carbon-friendly land management practices and thereby sequester more carbon. One of these incentives is the concept of a voluntary program for small to medium-sized woodlot owners to be paid for specific carbon-friendly forestry actions, such as pre-commercial thinnings or a focus on longer timeframes between harvests. Moving to implementation will require additional stakeholder discussions to sort out the scope and impact, but we believe this idea should be implemented over the coming months. At the same time, there was consensus in our working group that property taxation policy for working lands and open space is a critical incentive for land management. We currently have about 11.5 million acres statewide enrolled in these 3 taxation programs, the majority of which is in the tree growth program. They've arguably done more than any other state policy or initiative to keep our working and natural lands intact. Generally speaking, the tree growth program is working well and has been reviewed by the legislature dozens of times since its inception. But more can be done to update the open space and farmland current use taxation programs to incentivize climate-friendly land management practices. Both of these haven't been fully updated since their inception back in the 1970s. At the same time, we recognize that these programs can have impacts on municipal budgets, and that should be addressed as we improve these programs. The working group also recommends the use of efficient modern wood heat and power technology, utilizing mill waste and the tops and limbs of harvested trees. This dovetails with what we heard yesterday from both the energy and buildings working groups. The use of these systems will bolster markets for sawmill residuals, pre-commercial thinnings, and poor quality trees. I'd note that we received a lot of public comment expressing concern about the net carbon benefits and impacts of burning wood, and we'll want to work with the other working groups as this moves forward. We also identified the importance of habitat connectivity as part of our strategy for environmental resilience. And we're encouraging investments in infrastructure for private and public roads to allow wildlife crossings and aquatic organism passage. We heard some of that from the transportation working group yesterday and earlier today from the other working groups. Technical assistance. Once again, we lean on private landowners to continue to be good stewards of their land. There are 86,000 family landowners who own 10 acres or more, and yet only 30% of these woodland owners have ever had any professional forestry assistance. These lands, by the nature of their ownership and location, are the lands most at risk for conversion to development. Likewise, there are opportunities to improve on-farm soil conservation practices, but in many cases, landowners simply don't know where to start. The working group recommends additional resources, both staff and funding, and better coordination for agencies and organizations that provide expert advice to local landowners. The use of natural climate solutions on private lands will require extensive one-on-one conversations with landowners and the need to focus our available resources on how we can best meet their needs. Strategy 4, state programs. As we've heard from several other working groups yesterday and this morning, there's an overarching need to effectively coordinate land use planning to address climate issues and to ensure that environmental review and permitting are effective and efficient. Specifically, our working group noted the challenges of balancing the need for significant increases in renewable energy development with the need to maintain working forest and agricultural lands. Wood innovation is another cross-working group strategy. Wood is replacing petroleum in many ways, as the commissioner noted just a few minutes ago, and we need to support a variety of efforts to research, develop, and market innovative uses of wood. Our working group strongly supports state efforts to use innovative wood materials, whether that be cross-laminated timber, wood fiber insulation, or other mass timber products for new construction. We also need to build and invest in our local food economy and avoid the costs and climate impacts of transporting food from out of state. Maine has the ability to feed all of us. Currently, 90% of the food we consume comes from out of state. That needs to change. When we invest in our own food production, it allows us to implement climate-friendly practices. Science and research. As we've heard yesterday, climate mitigation, climate flux, and the cost-benefit analysis is a complex matter. This is especially true for natural working lands where management practices and environmental conditions can vary from year to year. We can't manage what we don't measure, and so ongoing research is a vital component of our strategies. Our working group recommends sustained funding for research on climate change mitigation and adaptation practices by the University of Maine in partnership with other academic institutions, the private sector, and state government. And so in conclusion, natural and working lands hold a tremendous potential to sequester more carbon and offset further emissions from all sectors of Maine's economy. It bears repeating once again that they're already sequestering the equivalent of 75% of Maine's annual greenhouse gas emissions. And we can do more. The proposed strategies, taken as a whole, can deliver on this. The majority of the sub-strategies before you are time-tested and proven to be highly effective. In the end, every additional acre of forest and agricultural land conserved and actively managed for climate outcomes will bring Maine closer to its goal of carbon neutrality, while every acre lost to conversion or not actively managed will make our state's goal harder to reach. And with that, I will turn it over to Jerry and Hannah for the next segment.